Welcome to the Mystery College podcast. Today we're doing an interview with Alexander Arguelles. He is a polyglot. He's familiar with more than 60 languages and speaks 10 of them. He has an amazing great books curriculum and a fantastic school through his website, alexanderarguelles.com. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. So I'm curious if you don't mind starting us off with what started your quest for knowledge and for learning languages, the academic track, and being a lifelong self-educator?
I think I was just blessed and gifted with, the right family and sort of the right environment and opportunities that I've always been very lucky to just be able to pursue what I wanted to without any hindrances, and been encouraged to do that. And just always had doors open for me. And I don't know what I did to deserve that, but I've just been extremely fortunate and lucky, and I'm very aware of that. As a child, I don't know, I was taken around the world to travel around the world and saw and heard languages being used, and just knew that there are other places and other things. My father, was a great book lover. Grew up in a home full of books. My mother's father had a bookstore and was always sending stuff, and I just have always been exposed to the idea that reading encyclopedias is fun, and that knowledge of other languages open doors, and I've been able to pursue that, and that's what I've done.
Fantastic. And I wonder about for the great books curriculum that you have. I noticed that unlike a lot of sources I've seen elsewhere, like on college curriculums for great books, yours has an extensive amount of different languages and also scope of reading from religious texts to literature. So I'm wondering if you could kind of share with us comprehensively what brought you to this curriculum that you've created.
Likewise, again, I've just been fortunate to receive my own education at universities that are known for developing the Great Books program at Columbia and the University of Chicago, and so it's just sort of steeped into me there too. I mean, I was no stranger to reading things like the Iliad or the Odyssey. Before that, I always had like children's versions of those kind of things, but then to be exposed to those in a real discussion forum when I was 18, I didn't necessarily take the most advantage of it, but I was just aware and familiar with that as well. And I just have always reflected on that sort of seminar type discussion when I think back on I just love learning and being in universities. When I think of the type of different classes that I've had, that kind of seminar discussion, where everybody's read something and discusses it, has always been, my favorite. And so I just, have made various endeavors to offer that sort of education to other people, even in other countries. When I was in Lebanon, I was hired to sort of build such a program for like an American university there, and then taught various versions of that as what I've designed as Great Books of the East, another place that wanted it more as like a East Asian consciousness type course, and looking at courses like that. So I've just always been really interested in the Great Books, and just specifically the canon, as Mortimer Adler developed it, and is available on the University of Chicago Great Books course, which is what we use for what I call now it's the Great Books of the Western world that we've got in my academy. And we had Great Books of the East using the Sacred Books of the East collection that Max Muller directed so long ago, but didn't have enough people to keep that going for the time being. But I'd be interested in having that start up again too, because I just love looking at the whole idea of looking at text. What do we know about Zoroastrianism? Well, I mean, the Zendavesta is out there. Let's read it and see what it's about. And it's a hard thing to do, and it really helps to talk that through with other people who are interested in that kind of thing. And so, being privileged to lead such circles has always been just you're never a master of anything like that. Maybe I've just read it more than you have. So when we read it and discuss it, I can point more things out to you, but you can still point things out to me. So I just have loved learning that sort of format.
Yeah, it's a fantastic format, and the academy seems amazing. Everything I read about it on your site and looked into seemed to be just very, very aligned with imbuing really strong lifelong learning habits, culturally, interdisciplinarily, and so I'm also curious about the type of routine that students may find themselves in if they're a part of the academy. Like, some, like there was an Eastern school, and then there's also the Western classics. What might people be reading on a daily basis as they're going through the cohort?
I call my courses circles because, we just meet once a week to read and discuss things. We have circles in various foreign language literatures. So, for example, in the Italian circle, we're reading a novel by Umberto Eco, the Cimitero di Praga, this Prague Cemetery. And in one of the German circles, we're reading Goethe's autobiography. And so in Spanish circle, reading Borges, Cuentos de Borges. So different actual literature reading and discussing in the foreign language, and that's sort of determined by who's in there now and what do we want to read next. We were reading South American literature, and we just chose other books along that way. For the Great Books course, I'm just sort of following along the content of Adler's list, but doing it in a different order. We did first history, and now literature, and then philosophy. So of ancient times, so sort of organizing things that way. But then I also have numbers of courses where I like to encourage people to teach themselves languages rather than teaching themselves. I have many years of experience as a college teacher teaching languages, and I can do that, and I enjoy doing that, but it's more rewarding to teach people how to teach themselves things. So I have a number of lecture courses where I just sort of give my pedagogy and philosophy of language learning, why it's important and how to do it, and how to view it as in a different fashion to make it more rewarding, to make it more of a quest and a mind expanding experience, and just sort of chalking up numbers of languages that you can say you've got some sort of a credential in. In classes like that, we've got people actually learning to read Persian now, and learning to read Arabic, and learning to read Sanskrit. So the Arabic, we're reading some Sinbad, from the 1001 Nights, just because it's interesting and culturally relevant. I also have a course in conversational Latin. I think that's very important, that Latin was such an important sort of cultural vehicle for Western civilization for so long, and it was a spoken language for so long. And that's a language that I learned myself as in the sort of standard way that we learn dead languages these days, which is just to read it and analyze it. And I realized that, I was good at that, and I did it the right, the way that was done, and I got a lot out of it, and it's okay to read in that way. But I also have learned how to read like German and French, and I can read German and French the way I can read English, but I couldn't read Latin the way, because I wasn't thinking in Latin. I wasn't, processing the material in Latin. I was translating and analyzing it. And that's something I wanted to do for the longest time. And when I finally taught myself how to do that and was able to do that, that really opened doors. That really, just opened doors and connections to be able to think, and really be able to think in a sacred language, a real old language that has this rich cultural tradition. I'm excited about encouraging people to do that and helping people do that. I've got a couple of levels of Latin, and hoping to do that with Sanskrit myself soon, and get other people involved in that too.
Fantastic. It's just it's really amazing what you're doing. It's really exciting. I think what I find for a lot of folks, were you saying something, Alex?
No. Go ahead.
What I find for a lot of folks who grow up in a typical education system, they like where learning is kind of actively discouraged from immediate peers. Like learning is involuntary, right? People are not doing it as a vocation.
Mm-hmm.
And that people are learning languages as involuntarily without any conversational context, like myself included, growing up in a United States public school system. I'm wondering, for folks who have had a lot of maladaptive ways of practicing or learning, or bad, or not purely like great incentives, what they can do to recalibrate their personal beliefs, behaviors, and start inching away towards enjoying being an autodidactic person who self-learns, who sees the value in that.
Well, that's a great question. Yes, like as I said, I understand that I'm privileged to have been sort of given the right environment to foster that sort of quest to keep learning my whole life, and encourage other people, share what I've learned, and encourage other people to do that. I know there are people who want to do that and don't know how, and get started, and as you said, particularly in the realm of languages, people, maybe you're taught languages, you've got a bad experience with them, in the back of your mind they're important, but you didn't enjoy what you did, and you assume that's the way it's always going to be, and it seems hard, and just And yet, obviously, you're still thinking, maybe I should learn a language. Maybe it'd be a good thing to know a language. I think if you're not thinking that, then there's so many other things to do with this life, and it's not a problem. But if you're still thinking, I'd like to learn a language, then your question, I think, is perfect. You know, how can you recalibrate? How can you think about language learning in a totally different light? Maybe by hearing me talk, but getting people like you asking questions like that. Just, I really do think that the whole way people look at everything about languages and language learning is frankly, it's not wrong, because it works. It can get something done, but it's just not. It's not the only way. It's not the best way. It's not the most enriching way. It's not the most comprehensive way. I like to think that. People pigeonhole, give a name to it. Spanish is a language, or Swahili is a language. And so we pigeonhole these things, then we put them in a category. And we imagine we're studying one isolated thing. But to me, I see each language that has a name, like Swahili or Spanish, is a language what I call with a small L. And they're all sort of reflections of language with a capital L, a big L. And that's language with a big L. I mean, that is what we are. We have to think in terms of language. We conceptualize things in terms of language. Language is what our minds do, how we communicate, how we think. And so if we only know one language, we only know one small aspect of that. If we know two similar languages, we have two different views. But the more languages we know, the more of a view we have of that, fundamental way that we think and process things. So when you think of language learning is sort of expanding your mind, getting a bigger grasp on how your mind works. That gives you a different perspective on the whole procedure, a different perspective on the whole process. And there's a number of ways of studying languages that sort of also take a much more holistic approach to saying, if I can find, some material that I can, I don't want to use the word study, but sort of, I like to think of like closely observe, inspect more and more, because I find it fascinating. And if I can respect it as a phenomenon and sort of fly over it and go deeper and deeper each time and understand more and more, and not have this goal of attaining some sort of perfection, or maybe I need it, maybe I have to pass a certificate for a class. I mean, that there are valid reasons for for approaching languages, and I use the same sort of grammars and textbooks and stuff that one would use, but just to have a different view on the entire procedure can kind of open new perspectives, and I think give people more success when they get started. I mean, it's a hard thing to do, like anything, when you want to start a new habit or a new, process, and you often have to make several false starts, and, but eventually it'll click if it's something you really want to, and you find, different approaches to it.
Yeah. So coming at it from different perspectives, and finding and optimizing the ways through action, of course, but also through having added perspective can then make it more enriching, rewarding. Having experimentation and play with the approaches.
There's also the element, I think, personally, from at least I say this from an academic perspective, that there is an impersonality, if you will, to the learning of language itself that separates the language as something of a technicality. So I'm from Southeast Asia, from the Philippines, and this is a country that has 60 living languages and 126 in total, a majority of which are dead. So by default, the language of my people is Bisaya. By technicality, the language we have to speak is English because that's the lingua franca. But then the national language is Tagalog. But the regional language is Manobo. And then the sub-regional language is Katanlaon. So an individual has to learn a language, not just one language, but several languages if one expects to be part of the milieu. And I think one of the problems with, and I say this in particular for expatriates, and even for locals who have only ever been in the capital, that is to say in Manila, that they approach language from a very technical perspective. Language is taught through grammar, not through the idea that a language has an identity. A language is a flavor, and a language has a personality. So if I say something in Bisaya, for example, I will come off as a certain kind of way. If I say it in Tagalog, it will come off a certain kind of way. If I say it in English, it will take on a different kind of mood. but all I'm saying is saying the exact same thing. It's like saying something in Japanese, where if I say something in Japanese and I sound like someone from the 14th century, I will sound rude. If I say it in a manner that modern Japanese people would say it, I sound fine. If I say it in a specific way that is very intrinsic to a specific social class in Japan, it sounds somewhat perverse. But you're basically saying the exact same thing. Like,
yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. I would even go a little bit further. I would think that languages are not just flavors and like you said, but they're actual. You can think of them as living entities. You can think of those as beings that you develop, and then you can think of them. What you're doing, forget the idea of learning a language. You're getting to know a language. You're getting you're developing a relationship with the language. Okay, what's my initial relationship? Like, there are 7,000 languages or something like that on this planet. What's my original relationship with most of them? Nothing, zero. I don't have any. Maybe I can hear it. Well, I know it's a human language being spoken. I can differentiate it from, some other kind of background sound. Can I listen? If it happens to be a kind of language I might have heard before, I said, well, it might be an Indo-European language, or that sounds like an African language or something like that. I might be able to, start to identify it, and then maybe I can, like, as you said, get to know some words, get to know what flavor it has compared to other languages, get more and more familiar with it. Maybe I can actually recalibrate my mind to work in it, to function in it. And I think that's the most fascinating thing about learning foreign languages for me, because that's what we're doing. I think people in the Philippines, I gather you said that, many people are almost naturally, it's funny that we have the word bilingual and trilingual are official words, but quadrilingual, quintilingual, sextilingual are not official words, but people in the Philippines are, people in South Africa, India.
There's no other choice.
Yeah. So, it's perfectly possible for a human mind to know and function in 6 languages. That happens, in locations that have it. But can you confirm with me? I mean, there, like you said, there's, what did you say, 60 languages spoken in Tagalog? Six languages. Yeah. So it's not uncommon to find people who know 4, 5, 6 languages, but it is rarer to find people who know 7 or 8 or 9, right? So there's sort of like a natural, time, but you could say our minds are almost designed to work 5, 6 languages. We can get them to 7, 8, 9. We have to work at it, but our minds are designed for that. And so if we're monolingual by culture, by background, it's almost like we're being robbed of our birthright to be able to think in different wavelengths. And another thing is the language, as you said, English is the language default for most of us, but we didn't choose it. And there's nothing wrong with English, but it has one worldview. It has one perspective, linguistically speaking, in terms of, things that you think very differently when you think in Arabic or when you think in Korean than when you think in English. So to say I'm only going to think in this one way is very limiting. And you don't know that it's limiting if that's all that you know. It's kind of like Plato's analogy of the cave. You only look at it. That's reality. You see it. The reality is that we can all think in 5 or 6 different languages. And if we don't, maybe we're missing something that we're supposed to be doing. So, we can give ourselves, by intelligent lifelong learning approach, we can give ourselves what we didn't get from our environment. But even if we have been given a number of languages, our own languages, what I found most fascinating is when the few languages that I know really well, that I had, that I could live in for years, German, when I could live in Germany for a long time, I could just tell my mind to take English out. I want to have German be my operating system now, because I chose it. There's nothing, if I'd been born in Germany, German is not special, but for somebody from the outside to come and choose another language and learn it to the level when you say, I can function in this. And then when you have several, what I call operating systems or functioning systems, when you can really process information differently, I've always, I'm very fond of studying history and philosophy and religion and all sorts of things along those lines in the humanities and in that kind of area, and I've found great enrichment from all of that. But I think I found the greatest enrichment simply from learning languages. Learning languages opens more doors. Learning languages in itself is a philosophical experience in itself, particularly if you're studying languages that that come from a spiritual tradition. You're interested in reading texts from that. I mean, sacred language is a sacred experience. Just using it and thinking in those terms. So for all those reasons, if you can yeah, just forget the idea of, again, not everybody's privileged to this. Maybe some people, for their job, they need to learn a language at a certain level. But for people who are curious about languages and, for whatever reason, just can't get, even though they had that bad experience that you said, and, and have a hard time getting started, but, just have that in the back of their mind. Oh, it would be nice to know more languages and learn the language. I think they have that sort of quest in their soul. And if they could recast, the way of thinking, I've got to, take this test and master this and, do perfect this, and think about it in terms of, well, I have no relationship with this now, and I'd like to develop a relationship. So let's just get closer and closer and closer and see how much more I can learn.
I also love the fact that when Jake introduced me to this, to your work, what surprised me first and foremost was he made mention of the great books. Now, I am aware of the great books as a series of books that was published between the early 1940s up until the 1990s. There was the Great Books of the East, which was and still is, in spite of the fact that it's somewhat outdated according to some standards, the most comprehensive resource on Eastern religions known to humankind. And then there's also Dr. Eliot's 5-foot shelf of books, which the premise of which was you have a 5-foot shelf of books of your choosing. And if you read one page, 15 or, a couple of pages, 15 minutes a day, in a year, one would theoretically be able to achieve the same kind of liberal education that would be impossible to achieve for a common working class individual at the time period, that they would be able to obtain in the comfort of their own house. And the reason why I'm familiar with these books is because I grew up with them. And when I heard that someone was teaching a course on the great books, I was elated, because the last time I heard about the great books was when my grandfather was still around, and nobody has mentioned of these things, at least within my country. So to have this, the original idea of the great books was the common working man would be able to educate himself to the same level of a collegiate professor, even at the comfort of their own home. And to this day, this is more necessary than it was 50 years ago or 80 years ago, because today education is just there's no other word for it. Education is shit. I'm sorry. It is. Yeah. We need the same kind of quality education back.
Yeah. No, that's why, this is what you referred to. This is the University of Chicago Encyclopedia Botanica thing, and these are all the collection of it, the 54 volumes. And as I said, I looked at this, okay, if I'm going to use this as a basis for the textbook, how are we going to do this? And I thought, well, we could just, go by the number and do it so that you could go from Homer to Aeschylus to Herodotus to Plato. But I thought, these history, and culture, anthropology gives us the background that we need to understand things. So let's read the history books first, and then literature is a little easier than philosophy, which is easier than science. So let's sort of take things in those chunks. So, we read Thucydides, we read Herodotus, we read Tacitus, Plutarch, then we read all the literature works, and now we're into Plato. We're almost we're like 2/3 of the way done. We're starting with Plato's Laws, and just the experience of having a group of people who have been doing this now for a couple of years now, just seeing how their references are building up. Just, I remember that, and we all have the experience. Oh, didn't we see this in Plutarch? Didn't we? Yeah, didn't we have this here?
My father's books. So yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then there's the great ideas, the 2-volume set that comes with this, where you have I don't have that here, but you have like main ideas like justice or truth or God, and then you have subtitles, subheadings, and this.
That's where you move into philosophy.
Right.
You had essays by Voltaire, Montaigne, Spinoza, Thomas Aquinas, the works.
So and they're key to like the page numbers that we have. So when we finish a work, when we finish a new author, I say, everybody go choose one of the topics from it's called the Syntopicon, the great ideas. Choose a topic from there, and then go back to everything that we read, and look at the references that were there, and just come out there and say, okay, I chose justice, or something like this, and yes, we read about this in Homer, read about this in Plutarch, and it all comes sort of coming back. I always think of of knowledge that's being. My mother had a set of looms when I was young. She was an artist, and she had these giant looms, and she would weave something. And initially, it was a big empty frame, and then she put a string down, and then another string, another string, and the more the strings that were on there, the more hooks to cut on, the more things, and it takes a bit of context. And I think that lifelong learning is like that. The more you learn, the more context, the more hooks you have to hang things on, the more places you have to put things. And so, yeah, it's very rewarding to have that going.
Do you feel personally? I'm sorry for the question, but do you feel personally that this more, dare I say, casual approach to scholarship is a personal response to the elitism of academia, or would you say that learning in and of itself, when done in a casual manner, is far more superior to the more orderly or strictly hierarchical systems of academia that we have today?
I like the idea of, some good old-fashioned knowledge and fact-based education when you're younger to give you a foundation, but it has to be done in such a way that it makes you realize there's so much more out there to know, and this is just my springboard. And and I'm getting, there are people who are older and wiser than I am that have processed this, and they're passing it on to me, and I'm getting this. But it's not the expectation that I then master this and focus in only on this and nothing but this, and and sort of guard it preciously and make this my, the standpoint from which I see everything, and make this my domain, and and guard it, and give degrees in it, and and have standardized tests in it, and just the whole way that education has sort of morphed into this sort of institution has gotten away from the foundation. So I like the idea of some solid foundations, but yeah, it has to be done in the spirit of saying, go somewhere. So I forget exactly how you just phrased it, Alex, but it was something like, yes, not casual learning, but learning because it's self-directed. Yeah, learning because it's something that you say, life demands of most people most of their time.
Yes,
physically, it demands that you sleep. It demands that you eat. We're social beings. You have family demands. We have jobs. So unfortunately, there are people that don't have no time to themselves. But I think that, if a person looks and says, if I think about myself as a mind, as a being, as a soul, I need to have some time for self-cultivation each day. Can I find or make at least an hour, and maybe turn that into 2 hours or 3 hours? Can I give myself a chunk of time each day that I'm going to use to cultivate myself, to grow? I think that kind of thing, if that's considered casual, then fine, so be it. But that's self-directed. That's sort of saying, this is the way I'm going to want to learn. Because you're right. I mean, it's, as I said, I think there's some good foundations that can essentially be given, molded into the young. But when you're young, you're not in control of the process. You're not choosing. You're going through growth phases. You're not going to get the most out of it. So it's a different procedure. But yeah, to a certain point, you would say it really should be the case that education means giving you enough knowledge to realize that you don't know anything and you need to go out and keep learning it, rather than, as I think it does, is to say, okay, you graduated, you majored in this, you're the specialist in this, you know this now, you can get a job in this area, this is your field, you go. That whole mindset to me is I've never been happy with that.
I agree. I'm in absolute agreement, especially, we are the only generation in existence that has access to terabytes of information at our fingertips, and we have no idea what to do with any of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that the issue, I am overworked, I am busy, I have a household to maintain, I have children to raise, I have this and that and this and that. This was the same issues that individuals in the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1940s were facing. And this was the time period when Dr. Eliot's 5-foot shelf of books was proposed. And I think one of the problems with education at large is it comes from, it has a bias, start them young, raise them, or do it early while their minds are still bendable. But there was a difference between me reading Bram Stoker's Dracula at age 12 versus rereading Dracula at 16, rereading it again at 22, and rereading it just 4 months ago. There's a difference.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between me reading a condensed edition for children of the Iliad when I was 15 versus when I was 26. And when I'm currently trying to reread it right now. My schedule's like too full, but there's a difference. There are things that I have overlooked or that it did not occur to me at the time. So I think there's the myth of having to, start when they're young is already a pitfall in itself, that you're supposed to only learn when you're young, and when you're old, you already know everything. That's a pitfall right there.
Yeah. No, I couldn't concur more. I think it's quite sad, that even many of my own friends, I look at them, it's like, you were curious through college, you learned, but it doesn't seem like you've learned anything since then. I think that, just the model that we have has set people up for that. It's like, I learn until I finish college, unless I go to graduate school. Then I learn as long as I'm in graduate school. But once I finish graduate school, I'm the expert in that. I I stay in that area, but I don't learn new things anymore. Even in graduate school, as I was told, it's time to narrow yourself down. It's time to, it's time to
specialize.
It's time to focus in. It's time to specialize. And I just, that just is not the way I've ever felt comfortable thinking.
I'd love to add this, or I'm curious for you guys about, so my observation, and this is an anecdote, but I feel it's true. My observation is that the majority of information that most people consume in a 24-hour period are tidbits of information or content that were created within the last 24 hours, week, month, even year. And there's less and less content being consumed that is a decade old, 100 years old, especially over 100 years old, and let alone thousands of years old. So I'm wondering about what it looks like to enhance or to integrate more information from different time periods as well, and in different mediums, formats.
Well, first of all, I wanted to react to something. Alex, I love what you said about rereading the same book at various periods of your life. I always found that to be incredibly enriching, and for that reason, I kind of, I have you guys have looked at my website. I mean, I have one page on my site where I took this list and I expanded it and said, well, what about other cultures? What about other times? In answer to your question, Jake, yes, so looking at that, it's like, we don't know anything. If you just look at this list, there's nothing, there's nothing from Korea on here. There's nothing from Serbia.
Japan or China.
So we're, just sort of to fit things like that and that, be aware of it. Then you have this vast ocean already of, there's more things than anybody can ever hope to read. But I think that, in a sense, as what you call it, terabytes of information, it's not that it's, I don't think there's ever been more information. I don't think there's ever been a point when you could say, I know everything that my, back in the Renaissance, we called them Renaissance man, I know absolutely everything there is to know. No, but you could say at a certain point, I have the foundations in every field and every discipline. I can look at things from every perspective. I don't know everything there is to know, but I know what I need to know to learn more about what I need to know. And I kind of feel that way about knowledge still, that it kind of doesn't matter if there's terabytes of, there's only, the only knowledge that really matters is what I have inside of my head, what I can process, what I can think of, or what I can, really access. It's if I'm thinking I've got knowledge because I can, I can just Google any answer that I want immediately, and I'm calling that knowledge, and then, and then the internet's off, and I can't do that. I'm stuck, whereas if I have something in my head, then I can revisit it over the years by rereading it, by seeing it again with different perspectives. So to incorporate, yes, that knowledge and wisdom that there is, that there are many traditions out there, that there are many, other things, just need to go to museums and stuff like that to keep that, open in our minds, and then be aware of these things. And one can't master everything, but one can respect a lot of things, know about some things. We can know a lot more that we have. We can, keep learning about things, as you said, not by, it's not too hard to look for stuff that's more than an hour old. If you have this list of books that you've been rereading, if you have this list of things that you've been thinking about, I think it's, and in particular, as we were talking about earlier, if you're embarked upon the study of languages, or rather the development of relationships with languages to get to know them and to get to know the cultures that they have expressed, and the history and the traditions that they have, and the literature that's been written in them. If you're thinking of it in that fashion, the closer you get to that, the more fun you have, the happier you are. It's there. So I've always thought of it this way. It's like I can't learn every language here, but if I know about them, and if I've got some information about Swahili over here, and about Turkish over here, and about Persian over here, and I keep my ears open to them, and I do a little bit of work with them, and I see what their relationship is, and and I understand them. At a certain point, one of them is going to grab me and say, "Okay, now it's my time. Now give me some more attention. Now it's time to get to know me better." And that's that's very rewarding when that happens. Just to think of even in languages, in the language of the community, so I don't know, this like almost competitive, like I mastered this, I know that he's so does he really know these? To me, it's like, well, if you love languages, the more you have time to spend with them, the deeper your knowledge will be. And as I was using that analogy of the loom before, to be able to connect things, and to see how things relate to each other and work together is just is very eye-opening. And when you do that through the medium of words in a different language, because you're actually thinking in it, because you're actually processing information. I think that's another thing about languages. I mean, just in the standard basic way that people might have of thinking, okay, language is learning how to read, write, speak, and what's missing? Read, write, speak, and understand. Those are like the four basic skills people have.
Also elocute.
Okay, whatever. They have this, but it's never mentioned think. Okay, and to actually think in a language, to me precedes those other things, and and the other things are predicated upon it. And thinking in a language is something that you can kind of aim directly at. You can kind of try to put your mind thinking in its terms and its vibrations. It's fascinating to study languages for their vocabulary, for their grammar, but when you get right down to it, languages are just sort of we're sending out certain vibes, certain frequencies on certain resonances that we've agreed to understand and interpret as such. And if there are other ways of intuiting that, if there are other ways of clicking into that, cottoning into that, and there are. We know this from the fact that, anthropology tells us that in maybe places like the Philippines and, and until recently, we have lots and lots of languages spoken. You have low levels of literacy, and you have intermarriage between peoples of different languages, and people just go and they pick it up and they learn, just the way we say, and it's true for us now, modern say, prepubescent children have the ability to pick up languages in a way that adults don't. It seems, though, that in maybe pre-literate societies, that adults retain that ability longer, and they're able to pick up languages, in a different fashion. And so maybe that's something that we could relearn how to do. It's interesting exploring that way, and precisely because of what you just said, that we have so much stuff available to us. If we can find now, so much of learning a language is you need to really listen to it. You need to feel it. And if we have samples of that, good samples of that, good samples of it that I think come from the realm of literature, that if you said things that weren't just written an hour ago, but things that were written a long time ago and are still read because they still have things of value to say to us. So if you take that kind of sound of the language and that sort of resonance of the language, and somehow you can get in onto that same wavelength, then I think you can understand that all the better. And the way to do that, to me, is by thinking in the language, making it automatic.
I would like to add, with respect to like a lot of the material nowadays, they're considered relatively new, but I would like to opine that the only reason why a lot of things seem new today is because there has been a trend for monolingualism when it comes to a lot of cultures, or rather more specifically to Western cultures, specifically within the American, mold. But if you actually look at the popular or pop culture of America today, a good chunk of America's pop culture is based off of literature that predates, today. The craze, for example, for Marvel and DC harkens back to Greek mythology, to Norse mythology, to African mythology. Just 2 years ago, people were watching American Gods, and it talked about an assortment or a coterie of gods from all sorts of different cultures. going further back from that, one of the most popular and most enduring forms of literature, Journey to the West, aka a story about Wukong, is still being told in China to this day. And in fact, there was a video game that was released not a year ago, talking about precisely this topic. And the reason why that's still so strong in the East is because they still know how to speak and read the way that their emperors used to be able to do. But fast forward to America today, nobody knows who Johnny Appleseed is, for example, or nobody knows the origin of the legend of the Jersey Devil. So the loss of language due to a dismissal of an individual relationship with language has resulted in a cultural void that makes everything seem like it's new, when in fact it's just the same story said over and over again.
Yep. It's nice that, as you said, if popular culture in a way can draw on the older sources, but it would be nicer if people knew it was doing so and also appreciated those older sources. So yep.
Oh, I have a question though. You have said several times over, the frequency of language, and while that is true from a linguistic and a grammatical point of view, as well as from a musicology point of view, would it be unfair of us to assume that you have an esoteric feeling for language? Because the three things that kind of draw my mind to is, number one, sacred language. You've said that 4 times. And then the frequency of language 3 times. And then another one is the sanctity, not just the nature of sacerdotal language, but the sanctity of language. So am I amiss if I somehow feel that you have an esoteric reverence for language of sorts, as though language itself were a form of magic?
I don't know about magic, but not magic, but yeah, I do think, as I said, when I said if you can imagine languages as being entities, languages as being things. I don't know, the different, in Hinduism, I forget what kinnaras on this, but they have different levels of spiritual beings.
Yes.
And I kind of, I can develop, I'm working on my own literature these days. I'm writing stuff myself, and I can consider, developing sort of a mythological system where I could think of sort of languages. Let's flip it around. We sort of think that, we spent maybe languages are the living things, and we're sort of like the entities that they carry. Maybe they, just flipping languages around and looking at it that way, I have found helpful at times. I mean, it's not something you talk about all the time or think about all the time. It's like, what kind of relationship can I have with this? Maybe it's the larger entity. Maybe I don't think that I'm sort of learning it, but it's using me. And so you open yourself up to the language, and you can just get totally swallowed up in it. I mean, this can be done in the most prosaic of everyday forms. I mean, studying Sanskrit was a wonderful thing with the old grammars and the old books, but you would just get lost in it, in a way that I never got lost in anything else like this. I remember one time I was studying Sanskrit, a friend of mine knocked at my door, and he looked like I've been swimming underwater or something when I came out, because I was just so engrossed in it and so immersed in it. So, yeah, I would think it's fair to say that I do find my whole engagement with languages to be much more. Yeah, it's more than linguistic. It is sort of onto the spiritual, mystical level for me.
Sanskrit is, by default, it is a sacred language, not due to its sacerdotal role compared to Latin. It is sacred because they believe that the vibrations generated by the syllables that you intone in Sanskrit is what created the world itself. That's the basis of the Sanskrit language. And you will find, the same notion even in the Bible, when they say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Or how in Norse mythology, a great emphasis is, paid to bards, poets, when they have been given the meat of poetry and they're able to sing of the songs of the gods and of, stories and whatnot. So words are magic. I mean, personally, for me, as a practicing Hindu, words are magic, mantras are magic. But I guess we're trying to say the same thing without exactly saying the same thing, I suppose.
Maybe, yeah. We both have reverence for them, that's for sure. We both have reverence for them, and I think that's, if I'm going to spend, you know, hours each day, you know, devoted to something, that's a form of reverence. You know, that is something that only makes sense to turn that into, you know, I could just leave that at the level of collecting languages. Could be like collecting cards or collecting something. I could just leave it at a, you know, a dry analytical level of almost like, you know, medicinal thing. But in order to continue making progress, you need to have a regular practice. You need to, you know, do something in the same way. And so I haven't spent inordinate amounts of time studying pranayama, but I did do a whole sequence of you know, of up to an advanced level of, you know, sort of pranayama offerings, and I've tried other forms of regular prayer. I've tried the Catholic, the Divinum Officium, you know, just saying the hours of the day throughout the, you know, the day, and just a set, you know, Latin prayers, you know, at different times. And so, yeah, I've sort of, you know, put myself in positions where I've seen how languages are used truly in a sacred context. And when I'm left to my own druthers, and when I can really concentrate the way I was studying Sanskrit when my friend knocked on the door, when I just can develop my own routine where I just read Persian, I just read Sanskrit, and I just, you know, I read Latin, and I just sort of go, and I see the connections, and I see the languages, and I see my brain thinking in them. And yeah, to me, that is, it's akin to, you know, an hour spent studying languages the way I do feels like an hour praying, or an hour meditating, or an hour doing pranayama exercises.
It's amazing. Jake?
Yeah, that was really fun to hear.
No, I'm sorry, I'm just nerding out. You know me.
Yeah. I'm also thinking about how this ties into someone's practice of languages. The idea of reverence. What does it mean for someone to, like? Because I think part of coming back to a regular routine of learning, or being an autodidactic, or finding groups to study, learn, practice with, like at the academy, is coming back to values. So I wonder how perhaps like your own students or yourself, or people you've found who comes back into learning as adults who may have a working job, who are busy, come back to setting self-learning as one of their utmost values. And how do people come back to getting clear about their values enough so that they have that level of clarity, which will allow them to sit down and study these things?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. In my academy, I think I've had a 17-year-old, and I've had an 80-year-old, you know, but the average, you know, are guys in their 30s, early 30s, who've, you know, are doing fine with doing them, but just feel like I never really got what I wanted in terms of education. I wanted to have more, and I wanted to come back, and they're sort of, yeah, looking to find some way to get started in that, and to find a community. And that's been extremely rewarding for me when I've had a number of people who've, you know, come and signed up, and, you know, taken one class, and then they sign up for another and another, you know, and I have people doing 5, 6, you know, different things sometimes. And I just, you know, see that, you know, they're really not just learning from me, but from each other, and, you know, and just, again, just sort of, it's sort of what do you call this? Those rolling stone analogies. You know, once you get it going, it gets started. So, yeah, I don't know if I've answered your specific question about how, you know, what did you say? How do people get started again? Was what you asked?
Yeah. How do people get started again? And then also, how do they clarify their values? Like, if there's a hierarchy of values, let's say learning may have became a bit lower once they came out of school,
right?
But as an adult, you know, maybe they need to learn things for work, but then there's another level of learning things for personal enrichment, for self-actualization in a Maslow's hierarchy sense, where learning is one of the highest goals for a human being.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. I think, well, on the one hand, you know, I think somebody who finds a discussion like this is already a seeker and looking for that kind of information, so they're going to be on the track for that kind of thing already. But the first thing is to be that kind of seeker, to be that kind of person who's looking for that. And I don't know how you start doing that if you haven't, but I think, as you just said, you ask the question. If you ask the question, you're already starting off on the path. And once you've done that, I am a very, 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 very firm believer in I think James Clear gets all the credit for atomic habits, but just that, making teeny tiny changes and sticking to them, and habit formation and building a habit. So building a habit and slowly building things in and making a little bit of progress from where you are. So it's amazing what you can achieve if you can just do a little bit systematically at the same time every day. So I think the answer to your question would be to have one of the first habits you try to build into yourself to be sort of this introspective habit, that you would say, hey, I'm promising myself, no matter how busy I am, no matter what else I'm going to do, that I'm going to take, the first hour of every Saturday of each month, I am taking for me to sit down and write out my priorities, write out where I'm doing with what am I doing what I want to be doing? Do I think do I want to take a different direction? To sort of take stock of what I'm doing, until I feel that I have some sort of routine involved where I'm making progress. And once you take stock and you look at that and you say, well, let me make some small change, because I think we just have to, if somebody else there is not this way, all power to them, but I'm this way and everybody I know is this way, is that we try so hard and we fail so many times. And I think one reason we fail is that we always aim too high. We have too great aspirations. So if we just try for small things and then build upon them, it's better than aiming too high and failing. Ultimately, you want to aim as high as possible, because then if you miss the target, you still get as far as you can. But when you're building up and you're building in a new habit, I think just to get it started is really the critical thing. And so if I can just give the analogy of what I'm talking about for languages, people really wanted to get starting learning languages, they just can't get in that self-started habit. I really would say that, you start by saying, is following that kind of advice. Okay, if you have a cup of coffee every morning, when you have your cup of coffee, hold your language learning book and just make that an established habit. I've got the book in my hand, and once you have your cup of coffee with your book in your hand, then you say, okay, when I have my cup, I'm going to open my book. Okay, once you open your book, and that's a fixed habit, I'm going to read, a line, I'm going to read a page, because anything is better than nothing with what you've done. And then I think if this is something that you want and it's a valuable practice and you're going to start learning, it will just build upon itself. And ultimately, if you want to learn, a language, you need to spend a lot of time in it. You need to spend, you need to enjoy plunging yourself into it for an hour at a time. But you need to work up to that from not even being able to conceptualize doing it. So that can be a long road. But if you have that basic attitude that the journey, the process and the journey of the purpose of the whole thing, then getting underway in itself is satisfying. Measuring yourself against, I'm still not able to speak it, is going to make you depressed. But thinking, well, I'm really making progress towards getting a deeper relationship, getting to know this language better, getting to feel its vibrations, getting to resonate with it is now something that I'm coming closer and closer to doing.
Would you say also that a good chunk of the of how you approach, because I get a very agora symposium kind of vibe from the circles that you have. Would you say that community, and not only the building of and the finding of commonality within these communities, but also the perpetuation of those communities as united by a singular shared interest, is one of the driving factors in the effectivity of your approach to learning languages? Because if I compare this to standardized academia, while you are surrounded by a lot of people in standardized academia, what you're doing is you're competing with everyone else. You're competing with the best grades, the highest grants, the anything and everything. It's a competition. So ultimately, it's an individual experience intermeshed with a collective, setting. But the kind of vibes or the kind of feeling that I get off from the circles that you're building is this is a more controlled, intimate, and very involved community.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm overjoyed when I hear, that like the students, I call them students, the participants, the people themselves are, they're forming other groups, other circles, other things to do, and so, they're, things that we don't have, or just whatever, just doing kind of things like that on their own. And I have just sense, as you said, by removing I don't give grades. I don't, just we're there. We read. It's not a semester program. We're done. We're here. We're reading a book. When we finish this book, we'll read another book. We want to read another book together. And that's we're going to read it and discuss it and develop our language skills as long as that's what we want to do. And we do that by coming and reading and talking together, and that's what we do. And the people are not competitive with each other in that environment. It's everybody is truly, always, reaching out to help other people and to communicate with them, and in that. And so that has been the one of the rewarding things. The other thing is, I do have an amazing range of people who have, different, I've had professors of musicology, I have, emergency room doctors, I have, ballerinas, I have all sorts of, orchestra conductors, I have, all sorts of, what do you call them, computer scientists, the programmers, college students, just the widest range of people, and just getting all these different perspectives, and, and from all over the world too. I mean, they're mainly in North America and Britain, Europe, but I have people in China and Australia, and, people from other countries there too. So it's just an incredible variety of people that are there because they want to be lifelong learners, they want to know more, and because they realize, as you just said, the value of the community of the learning among themselves. So if I have contributed to that, that's very gratifying to me to know that.
Fantastic. And we're getting kind of close to the end of the hour here. How are you doing on time?
I'm fine. Yeah. You're
all right? You're okay if we go over the time, or?
Yeah, if we go longer, yeah.
Okay, cool. Any last questions you have, Alex?
No, it's all good.
Well, okay. So, is there any books that you tend to come back to for self-awareness, or for language learning, or for the insights that you gather from?
But like Alex was mentioning, books that you reread over the years there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, in which regard? You asked for a whole big bunch of regards there. I mean, I have internalized a lot of things, but I have, since I think, Alex, you said you're practicing Hindu. What does Hinduism say about the age of 60?
By the age of 60, then you should already be sannyasya. You should be retired. You should be contemplating the end of life, where you renounce the world in order to live as an ascetic, because your duties and responsibilities to your family, to your people, and to your gods are done.
Okay. I'm feeling a non-Hindu version of that. I'm feeling a me version of that, whatever I am, Western mixed, international Persian version of that. Turning 60 was monumental for me. I'm 61 now, and that sort of made a difference. And the feeling that what I mentioned before, I think it's more important now what I have inside of me. I'm more interested in writing myself than in reading others. I've been reading my whole life. I'm still reading material. I'm still going after things, but I'm not sort of looking to. It's time for me to do something different, to sort of shift gears and to lead people in learning this way, and to share what I do this way. But also, my whole life I've wanted to be more creative, and do something in terms of just creating something artistic, and and integrating different kinds of arts in it. And that's what I'm doing now, and that's what I'm sort of putting my focus into. So I mean, I've got lots of people that historically I've read in different contexts for my favorite philosopher at this stage was this person or that person, or what my favorite the authors that I really just admire. And it's like, wow, how does he write that well? How does he create these images? Or just the traditional tales and text. I mean, I've always loved the kind of wisdom that's embodied in things like Aesop's fables is the most formal way that we know about it, but it goes so much deeper in what's called Kalila Wadimna and then the Hitopadesha and the Panchatantra. These tales that are, as you mentioned, you can read them first as a child, and they're like little kid stories about animals talking. But then you realize it's the minister, and there's a philosophy going on underneath it, and that kind of thing where you can see and appreciate things on different levels. The way Alex mentioned before, reading a book like Gulliver's Travels. Again, you read that the first time as a kid. Oh, it's a guy who goes to the place of giant. But then you realize what a satire it is, and how much how we all take ourselves in that way. And so there are a number of books like that I have that I've read every 5 or 10 years throughout my life. And they aren't necessarily the greatest classics out there in the world. Some are, some aren't. But as I said, these days, for me, in terms of I just feel like I've had some sort of shift now that I need to sort of reverse the direction. Most of my life until now has been input. I've been taking stuff in, and now I feel like I need to do some sort of more creative output, if that makes any sense.
I would have not thought that you were 60. I was, to be perfectly honest, I thought you were, in the benchmark of mid 40s, early 50s. So 60.
61. I'm 61.
Wow.
Yeah.
You don't look 61.
I do attribute a good part of that to the way I live, which is the way that I study, and they're integrated. I do integrate. I basically live the life of a monk. I get up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and I read, write, or study until 6. I go for a run, and then I come back, and my day consists of reading languages that I love to read, helping other people that want to learn to read them, and writing my own thoughts. I mean, how could I be more blessed than that? So I'm very, fortunate to be able to do what I'm doing, and and I have been able to have a wife and 2 wonderful sons that are grown out there in the world now. So I've achieved a degree of happiness and fulfillment. So I think that maybe is reflected in things. I do thank you for mentioning that. I do sense that often myself. I stand around the guys and I don't look this old, do I? But, so it's strange. Yeah, but I do think that, I do lead a healthy lifestyle in all the traditional ways. I mean, I've been a vegetarian since I was 9 years old. I just can't eat meat. It just doesn't seem like something that is in the category of food for me. I had that realization when I was a kid, and I wasn't able to act on it until I was went away to college. My parents said, you're going to go eat your meat, so, but once I went to college, I just sort of stopped. It just that intuitive feel that this is not there. And just likewise for exercising, going for a run for an hour each day every morning is just part of my blood. It's the way that I do. So sort of living in your basic standard healthy way. I think I'm pretty much a poster child for some of that, but I really do think that pursuing knowledge and pursuing languages the way that I do is a contributing factor to my energy. Because I don't just, if I look long, it's such that I do that. I still act pretty young, I think. My cat's the same way. He's 12. He's yelling at 51. Oh. Would you believe he's 12?
Oh, look at you. Well, hello. What a cutie.
He's yelling at the door. Sorry, I took that occasion to let him in so he'd stop.
Love it. Awesome. Yeah, well, yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show. Love to have you back anytime. Such a pleasure speaking with you.
Okay.
Are there any last things you'd like to share with folks who are looking to take the next step in a self-learning journey, like either through the academy or through self-directed means?
I guess I do need to give myself a little plug here. I mean, because that's what I'm out to do, is to help people do this. And so I do, anybody who wants to look at, you obviously found me here. I've got a YouTube channel where I try to put out some information each week. You can listen to that. I have a newsletter people can subscribe to. Alex, where's your cat? I don't see you have one. He's got a cat. We've got our cats.
I do have a cat. My cat is outside.
I've got a cat dog here, Shibina.
Oh, okay.
Hey,
but yeah, anybody who just take a look at any of my offerings. Anybody who's curious, you don't have to make an initial commitment. You can come for, come take a trial, sit in, see what it's like, and if it's for you, give it a try. So be very happy to have more people join. A couple of circles are kind of full, but most of them have room, and I'm always open to not half, but a good number of the things that I'm offering now are because participants asked for that. Sanskrit, people said, let's do Sanskrit. You've got Latin, let's do Sanskrit. Okay, so we started that. So plenty of room in great books. We're going to start Aristotle soon. If who wants to look at that, finish Plato's Law, start Aristotle. So, but just I'm happy to share. I do feel like it's always been the case that I love learning and sharing what I've learned. And so if people like the way that I learn and want to share it, I'm happy to do that in any form that they'd like to get that from me. So that's what I have the Academy for, and I'm happy that it's working along. But just come have a look. Anything's interesting, ask, and you can have a sample.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you for being for part of the podcast.
Okay. Thank you so much.